Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson. The podcast is brought to you by Pick Six, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPicks for $50 in Pick Six credits with a $5 deposit. We're going to be talking prospects today. I've got Aram Leighton with me from Just Baseball. And Aram, you released a fully updated top 100 prospect rankings a couple weeks ago. We're going to focus on that list. And I know if you're like me, like just 2 weeks after a list is live, I'm sure there's already stuff you wish you could change about it and that type of thing. But I love the fact that you went with just 100 at bats or 35 innings pitched for graduations for your list, because after all, we can make the rules. I've done similar stuff with like international free agents who sign when they're in their mid-20s, of leaving them off my list. So I love that fact because I love just getting these guys off the list as soon as possible.
I appreciate that. I was curious how that was like received outside of us, because for me it was just the same thing. I want to keep it fresh. Like there were so many players that due to injury or whatever it may be, or just service time manipulation, or usually a combination of the two. I'm like, how much more can I tell you about X or Y player that you've been hearing about for 3 years who's been in the upper minors? Like I want to start talking about some of the younger players at the lower levels who are performing and deserve to be in that top 100 category. And as we always talk about, there's probably another 150, so there's probably another 50 75 players that could make that threshold, or that you can make a strong case for top 100. And I'd rather have those guys have an opportunity to get in there. So I appreciate that, even though it is kind of making our own rules a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's fine. You're producing a list. I don't think you need to be fully rigid and stuff like that. So I love it. First, I think I want to ask you about some guys, and I really want to make this episode a lot about really solid prospects that I just haven't talked about a ton on the show this season for whatever reason. And obviously, Arm is doing his list. He does the top 100 for Just Baseball, and it's a real set of prospect rankings. It's not for fantasy specifically. So there will be some differences there, but really wanted to focus on some players that I just haven't given enough shine to this season. And I wanted to start actually with a couple catchers. We'll start with Dalton Rushing of the Dodgers, although he's been playing left field, I think exclusively since getting bumped up to AAA. Just a really exciting season for Rushing. I don't think too many people have kind of brought up just that he is a significantly better prospect this year, to me at least, than he was last year. He's making more impact at the plate. He's cut his strikeouts. He's cut his strikeouts at AA compared to what they were at high A last year, and he's cut his strikeouts so far at AAA compared to what they were at AA. But I'm really impressed with what Dalton Rushing's doing, and I'm interested in what you kind of see his ceiling being offensively, and sort of how you view the Dodgers using him specifically next year.
Yeah, he was one of the biggest climbers for us, and so I love starting there. Even before the left field thing, because it was right around the time that we were updating it, I was just looking at the bat, looking at the offensive profile. I'm like, they got to find a way to get this guy in the lineup, right? Like, I don't know how or what they're going to do. That, or he needs to be the headliner in a massive deal because his value's never been higher. And sure enough, they start getting him the reps in left field, which I think, really does solidify how much they believe in the bat side of things as well. And I had a chance to talk to Dalton at spring training this year, and the focus for him the entire offseason and going into the year was being a better catcher, working with the ridiculous super team of arms that, of course, have been banged up this year, but through spring training, catching a lot of these arms and working with them and just learning the nuances of catching. As you know, like in fantasy, there's a lot of adjustment period with the catching prospects and then the catchers at the big league level. So the idea that the offense came along the way that it did, despite the fact that he was locked in on defense, is pretty impressive. And then beyond that, I think you're seeing, of course, you're getting a little bit of a PCL bump, but I also think you're seeing some like positive effects of not needing to game plan and work behind the dish nearly as much. This guy can just go play left field and hit. And since he's been up in AAA and playing left field, he has a hit in almost every single game, a handful of multi-hit games, and he's hitting 311 with a 950 OPS. He's walking as much as he's striking out. But from the offensive profile, I just think it's so sound. He's going to produce slightly above average contact rates. He elevates so consistently and gets into it at the pull side, but can get into it at all fields, and he's not going to chase. So I look at that offensive profile. I think it's sound, and I think it can be a fun balance of, above average power and really good on base skills. And now you have the multi-positional side of things. From a fantasy perspective, that's amazing. But the other side is that the catching really came along to where I think you could be big league average. You have that with the ability to just get by in a corner. And, that's a really valuable player.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the Dodgers have kind of been sort of punting backup catcher here for a couple of years. And so from just a fantasy standpoint, I'm sort of dreaming of the idea of Rushing being just the backup catcher all of 2025 maybe, and then just playing left field, hopefully, 70-80% of the time when he's not catching. Do you see that as a potential outcome just for 2025?
I do. I watched the defense in left. He looked more comfortable than you'd expect from a guy that, was just catching. But then there were a couple plays where it's like, okay, maybe he needs a few more weeks out there. But I do think he's athletic enough to get to the point where he's passable. And, you've seen some of the outfielders struggle up there. I think both short-term, long-term, you look at the offensive profile, it's probably more sound than some of these other guys, these young guys that have performed through stretches with the Dodgers. And then, I don't know totally what the roster landscape will look like, but maybe on days where Ohtani's pitching, that DH spot is also open. So, they could get a little bit more creative. It's not fully clogged by Ohtani all the time now. I'm curious if that's another way. I think they're going to be able to just find him at bats through the different ways they can move around that lineup. And now with that positional versatility, I'm excited. And I think there's a reason why they held on to him at this deadline. And you didn't even hear anything after about them, even floating the idea of moving him. I think that says a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he would have just been a massive chip I don't think anyone got moved at the deadline that they would have even thought about including him for. So yeah, really excited to see how things go with Dalton Rushing and the Dodgers next year. Another catcher that you've got pretty high on your top 400 or top 100 is Edgar Quero of the White Sox. And I got to admit, I thought, I was too low on Edgar Quero for, I knew that he skipped high A and he went straight to double A from single A back when he was still with the Angels. And then obviously gets traded to the White Sox. I just didn't see like a super high ceiling there. But I got to admit, like what he's done so far at double A and triple A this year, just 21 years old, turned 21 in April, switch hitter. He's hitting .313 with 4 homers in 23 games so far at triple A. Edgar Quero, does he have a chance to be the opening day catcher for the White Sox next year? And what do you see as sort of his offensive ceiling?
It's funny you bring up the whole process, because there's been points and times where, I've cooled on Quero to a degree too. I think as he started to compile more ABs and that wonky Southern League and kind of wondering where it's going to be. Yeah. Sometimes you almost have to reel yourself back in and like I had to remind myself that 98.5% of his at-bats have been against pitchers who are older than him in his professional career still, which is crazy. I mean, that may have changed over the last couple weeks, but I doubt it in AAA now. But the big reason why we ended up bumping him was, when you see those numbers shift, sometimes it's just, a guy that's enjoying a nice streak or whatever it may be. But I noticed a slight shift in the setup and his load, and actually put a thread out on kind of breaking down the swing adjustments there that he had made. He had been a lot wider before and had really struggled to control his base. Now he got more narrow and was sinking into his back hip. And you could just tell that it was a much more natural move for him. I think before it was much more contact oriented. I'm going to be wide and just let my really good hand-eye coordination do the work. Where now he's like really getting coiled into the back hip and using the lower half, using the ground and tapping into more power, one, and holding his weight back, which is also really important because that's going to allow him to elevate the ball more consistently. And that's going to allow him to just hit the ball harder when you're using the ground and you're also able to stay behind the baseball and not kind of prematurely drift forward. So when I saw that mechanical adjustment, I'm like, all right, if the batted ball data backs it up, then I'm definitely in on this guy. And I was able to track it up until I saw the mechanical adjustment, and I got a sample of the data before, sample of the data after the mechanical adjustment. And I mean, you saw a 2 mile per hour difference in exit velocity. You saw his launch angle against fastballs go from 3 degrees to 14 degrees. Pulled the ball in the air at a 6% increase. His slugging on contact went up 150 points. His hard hit rate went up 11 points. And his home run to fly ball rate went from 3% to 16%. And a lot of that was in the same league. So that was enough for me, because just seeing those mechanical adjustments were really impressive. And then when the batted ball backs it up and the numbers back it up, I feel really good about where he's headed offensively. I think, is he going to light the world on fire? Probably not, but you're seeing a guy with a smaller frame now able to tap into more power. I think he can hit 20, to 25 in a really good season. But the other thing that we're seeing is, I think, more consistent line drives, doubles, just more hits that are going to get through, because that average exit velocity is just higher. I think the BABIP will just naturally be higher as well. And we know the approach has always been great. So adding a little bit more pop can make a big difference, I think, for a player like him.
Yeah, man. It's just every year there's more and more catchers coming. It's an exciting time for that position. And
it used to be rough not that long ago. It was pretty brutal.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like, I think you've got to maybe like 12 catchers in your top 100.
That's actually crazy to hear. I don't know if I counted that yet, but it's been a while, I think, since we've had 12 catchers in there.
Yeah. And yeah, I think Edgar Quero is going to stay in big league camp for a long time next spring. And, I think he will be on all the top 100s he needs to be to qualify for the prospect promotion incentive pick. So that'll be interesting to see if he cracks that opening day roster for the White Sox, but shouldn't be long after that if he does not. So just another one with Dalton Rushing for fantasy managers looking at 2025 that, if you're looking for a cheap backup catcher or second catcher or something like that, Rushing, Quero should both help next year. How about Quinn Mathews of the Cardinals? He's had just a monster breakout year on the mound, and I feel like I just haven't gotten that many questions about him for whatever reason. So I haven't talked about him a ton on the pod, but 23-year-old lefty, 6'5". He's just been dominant at high, dominant at AA. What have you seen from Quinn Mathews this year?
It's funny what you said earlier about like, I'm sure right after you put the list out, there were some adjustments you wanted to make. The draft guys, of course, like from this year, like you're going to always want to adjust that right after because you didn't see him in pro ball. But the one guy that, I've seen plenty of this year, and then even after a couple starts after we released the list, and I was like, man, you know what? I should have pushed him higher, was Quinn Mathews, and we had him at 48. But that's how amazing he has been this year. Remember, this was the guy that threw 150 pitches, at Stanford. I think because people didn't really think he was a first round guy, right? Like he was more of that 4th, 5th round type, innings eater, low 90s at best, and massage his way through a lineup and you hope it works. And of course, the Cardinals always like those types of players. I don't think anybody was expecting that fastball to jump 3-4 ticks almost and now sit 95. The thing that's really interesting about it is it sits 95, but with great characteristics. He gets above average carry as well. So, I mean, that's why it played in college at the lower velocity, but now he's got those same characteristics and he's sitting 95. So that pitch is playing like, a plus heater or maybe even a little bit better than that. And then off of that, he still is the same guy that was pitchability, right? That was a good feel for 3 pitches. And that changeup was always his pitch, right? It was your classic polished lefty fastball changeup guy. His changeup has been diabolical this year because you think about it, it was already a good pitch, and now you have 13 miles per hour of velocity separation with the same just nasty fading changeup that you had before. That really does help that pitch play up. Opponents are hitting $140 against that, and then now that he's throwing harder, that there's so much more sharpness to his slider, which, was kind of more of that like dull, just spinny pitch, where now it's 86 miles an hour. It's sharp, and he's landing it for a strike 74% of the time. Opponents are hitting well below 200 against that too. So it elevated the slider, it elevated the fastball, and then it allowed the changeup to play up more. He's got 3 pitches that I think are 2 are comfortably plus. I think you could argue that he has a chance for 3+ pitches, and then he mixes in a taste-breaking curveball. He's not walking guys for how much of an uptick he's had in velocity to still command his stuff the way that he is. I mean, I think this is one of the best left-handed pitching prospects in baseball now all of a sudden with what he's doing. It's been one of the more remarkable leaps I can remember in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason he's not at at AAA is he opened the year at single A. So he's climbed 3 levels already. I'm interested to see how quickly he can break into that rotation, just because like the Cardinals they're not like the Mariners where they're just quick to get these guys to the majors, although they haven't had a lot of guys like this either. So I don't know. Like, do you see him up for most of next year? Do you think they send him to AAA for like 10 starts?
I think he should be. It was funny. We were talking about it. Like, if the Cardinals are in the hunt, like, is this a guy that could come up and help them at the very least as like a lefty out of the bullpen if they want to manage his innings or whatever it may be? Because what I'm seeing right now is just a guy that's too good for minor league baseball at this point, or at least for AA. He's doing it in the Texas League too, right? And so last 4 starts, 24 innings, 37 strikeouts against just 4 walks, 2 earned runs. So when you're looking at it through that lens and the way that he's performing right now, like, this is a guy that I do think, like, if they were in the hunt, you could look at him and say, hey, this is a guy that could actually help us. So to that point, I think he should be up relatively early next year. Knowing the way that the Cardinals operate, like you said, there might be a chance that we see him make a handful of starts in AAA. But if they're not able to fill the rotation the way that they thought through spring train or through the offseason, with some moves or, potentially, just seeing how that all shores up for them, I think there's a chance he could be up there pretty early. And, I think we're seeing teams more and more confident that if you can go pitch in the Texas League, you can kind of skip the International League and bring you up, like you said, with the Mariners, I think. And obviously that's the PCL, but still, I think there's a lot of teams that feel like if you can get outs in the Texas League, you might as well make the leap, and we'll see how you do it in the big leagues.
Yeah, and he's going to eclipse 20 or 120 innings on the season, I think, in his next start. So
it's pretty built up.
Yeah, that's really impressive. So I would definitely look to Quinn Mathews for 2025 value for people out there that are in those types of leagues. If you like videos like this one, please consider hitting that like button and giving us a subscription there on YouTube. Really appreciate that. Aram, look, Jesus Mate with the Brewers he's basically been the talk of the DSL this season, and you were very aggressive with pushing him up into the top 100. There's just, it's very exciting. He seems to be checking all the boxes you would look for in a DSL prospect. How high is the ceiling here with Jesus Mate of the Brewers?
I think it's star, and I don't like getting ahead of myself with these, complex prospects, especially players that have not made it out of the DSL yet. But I mean, this guy was 16 years old still at the start of the season, right? He turned 17 in I think May, and the second week of May. And the bat speed is just remarkable from both sides of the plate. It's probably some of the most impressive hands I've seen from a teenage prospect in a long time. And then you look at the way that he's able to command his at-bats. I think it's probably the lowest chase rate I've seen at the complex. Like, this guy's running a chase rate below 10%. So there's not really expanding ever as a switch hitter with ridiculous bat speed from both sides of the plate. He's putting up, impressive numbers. And then the feel to hit too. Like, there's some things in his pre-swing moves that I think are quite disruptive that, he'll probably iron out as he, matures and faces more challenging pitching. But the fact that, he has this big barrel tip and this hand pump and all this going on, and he can get to pitches in all these different locations, I think really is a testament to how quick he is and how good the bat to ball can be and already is. So when you look at that, and then the fact that he's already crushing balls pretty hard too. I think we've seen exit velocities as high as 109, which, 109 from a guy who just turned 17, that is going to be a little bit stronger, I think, very soon. And we're seeing some speed, and there's a chance he can, stick at shortstop. He's got a pretty good arm. Like, I think it's just explosive potential that you really haven't. I don't know if I've seen a player that has the tools and the polish that Mate has in some time, I think, at the DSL and even the complex. And, scouts I've talked to, some people that I've talked to, even in the Brewers org thinks, he's special. So, I think says a lot as well. And I mean, the numbers and, what we've seen have backed it up.
Who's got a higher ceiling, Mate or Leo DeVries?
Ooh, that's a great question. The fact that DeVries is doing what he's doing in low A, I think the floor is definitely higher with DeVries. I would say Mate's got the higher ceiling. just because of the bat speed. It's just different. It's different. It's just, I don't know if I've seen a guy that can create that kind of whip, that easily. He's not a huge dude yet at all. So I love DeVries. I think that the big part that makes him so amazing is how polished he is at 17, as well, and the ability to lift. And like Made's going to need to elevate a little bit more. And I think that's where the mechanical things come into it. But man, that's a great question. I think Made has the higher ceiling.
Yeah, that's sort of how I would kind of view it too. But it's so hard to say that about like the DSL guy when the other guy's doing it, full season. But I mean, Made's kind of a given at this point, I would say, just given the Brewers track record, that he'll be assigned to Single A next year.
Oh yeah,
and he doesn't turn 18 until May 8th, so we'll get hopefully we'll get like 4 weeks or so of him at Single A as a 17-year-old. So I mean, if he performs well early next season, I mean, it's sky's the limit on him. So Jesus Made, one of the best DSL prospects in quite some time. Jarlin Susana, it's been a really strong year, I think, for the Nationals, just in terms of their pitching, basically from the big leagues on down this year after some rough years there. And Susana is one of those guys who took a big step forward, just a strikeout machine. There's always been some reliever risk with him, just for kind of all the normal things that can end up pushing a guy to the bullpen. But where are you at on Susana right now? And like, how you see him as like a number 2 starter, number 3 starter who just eats innings? Like where do you sort of see him going from here?
It's just, I have not seen a shift like this in the middle of the season. I'm trying to remember, like, there's not a clear mechanical adjustment. Like, he's a guy that always goes out at the stretch. And for whatever reason, first 12 starts, he's walking, 14% of guys. That's kind of par for the course with Susana, so far as a pro. And then something shifts, and over his last 10 starts, he's walking 8.7% and is just filling up the zone with 2 distinct fastballs, with a disgusting slider, and then even mixing in a changeup all of a sudden. And I'm like, man, this guy looks like a much more complete pitcher, and also looks like a guy that can stick in a rotation. If he's able to do this, and continue to fill up the strike zone, I think there's number 2 upside there. My question is, is this sustainable? Can we see him do this, going into next year and through the rest of this year, of course? But the fact that he's over his last 10 starts landing a slider for a strike at a near 70% clip, his fastball at his first strike at about 67, 68%. And it's 2 distinct. You got the 4-seamer and then just a really heavy, late running 2-seamer that's going to allow him to get a lot of ground balls and weak contact as well. That's what makes me really confident in the starter's outlook now. As long as he's keeping the walk rate below 10%, like, he's a guy that, can get the strikeouts clearly when he needs them. But now I think he's also starting to realize that, he can pitch to early contact. If you're going to barrel up 100 with run, like, I guess, we'll tip your cap and congrats on the barrel. It only cost me 1 pitch. I'm going to go after the next guy. So, he's getting the strikeouts still clearly. His last 10 starts, still striking out 36% of batters, but I'm seeing more willingness to get that early contact on the ground, 54% ground ball rate in that span. And also you're just seeing him look more confident. He's still just 20. So if this command, epiphany that he's had continues, I really do think there's that number 2 upside. I think there's going to be volatility still, just because the command probably will come and go at times, like it does for a lot of tall, like powerful pitchers like this. But I think he settles more in the middle rotation, but I think he gives you a lot of flashes of it too.
Yeah, he's going to probably settle. He's probably going to finish the year at around 100 innings, which is good for a 20-year-old. Obviously, he's got the big body. And don't judge him by the ERA, I guess is what I would say. He's got a 5 ERA at high A and a 2.35 FIP. So it's been a very impressive summer for Jarlin Susana. I got a question the other day asking if I thought Eduardo Tait, young teenage catcher with the Phillies, was a top 100 prospect for fantasy. And I quickly said no, just because of him being a 17-year-old catcher who's 3 years away from the big leagues. but you guys have him in your top 100, and I definitely respect that, especially as a real life list. I mean, just an incredibly exciting, 17-year-old. He's at single A. Obviously, the numbers on the complex were very, very impressive, but just for him to even get the bump up to high A or to single A as a 17-year-old speaks to what the Phillies think of Eduardo Tait. So do you think is this a guy who like eventually is going to be like a top 15, top 20 overall prospect? Is he on that kind of rocket ship for you?
It wouldn't shock me. Of course, this could be a situation too, and I'm glad you mentioned like the fantasy lens. Like a big reason why he ends up cracking the top 100 is just the impact in the polish on both sides. Where there's a guy that I think he's thrown out. I want to say like 40% of base stealers already in low A, something like that. Like and also just looks pretty comfortable behind the dish. I mean, the way that he moves there, the way that he receives, of course, it could get a little bit better, but he's 17. He blocks well, he receives well, and clearly the catch and throw is quite advanced for his age. So seeing that, and then you have a guy that offensively is already flashing what he is flashing. I think we've seen him really show some power to the pull side. And in difficult environments to do so, whether it's the complex in Florida or the Florida State League, but also hitting balls as hard as 110, 111 miles an hour. I think also says a lot about the power that this guy can already tap into. But there's some things like he likes to chase spin quite a lot. So that's something that can do you in as you face more challenging competition. But of course, it's something that you could definitely rectify as you mature, and he's not even a legal adult yet. So that's the amazing part is that he has been this productive as a guy that's, like we talked about with the catching development, handling a lot, getting into full season ball now as a backstop. So seeing the power and the fact that it can be plus with the defense lends me to believe that he can be that guy on that trajectory to be ultimately that top 15, top 20 prospect. But to your point of like, is he a top 100 prospect yet? From a fantasy lens, like I could understand why there'd be some pause, because there might be an outcome where he swings and misses too much. And, ultimately it's more, feast or famine at the plate and then a good defensive catcher. That's still a good prospect, but maybe doesn't carry as much weight, from a fantasy lens. So I get that. But that said, I have been really impressed with the field of hit so far. I think there could be some more swing and miss concern, again, as we talked about the swing decisions, but so far he's way ahead of his years on both sides and, already flashing. I mean, I think he's got 90th percentile exit velocity of like 104.5. That's ridiculous for a teenager.
That is pretty insane. Yeah. And if I were doing real life rankings, Tait would be one of the guys that would get the biggest bump up because less concerned about proximity and that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, just a very, very impressive teenage catching prospect that the Phillies have there in Tait. Okay. I love that you got Luke Adams of the Brewers in your top 100. I can't really figure this guy out. He's like, what position's he going to play? Like, he's got such a weird sort of setup. He's just always been extremely productive. But the OBP is always, north of 400 and the batting average is always south of 250. Like, what is a Luke Adams?
I'm still trying to figure that out. But what I was able to figure out is I like enough of the ranges of outcomes, I think, here that this guy's got to be a top 100 prospect. It looks weird. Everything he does looks pretty weird.
Yeah, it does.
It's just weird everywhere. But I was like surprised that he wasn't as bad at third as I thought. Like, I didn't think it was that bad. Like, I thought maybe even he could play there a little bit. So that was one side that was really impressive to me. But with Adams, I think what you're looking at is a guy that surprisingly has a really good feel for the barrel for how big and like haphazard the swing can look. The raw power is what really shines through, and he's got tons of that. But I think the approach being as ridiculously polished as it is amazing. It's not just the low chase, right? It's not just the fact that he's chasing below 15% of the time. It's also the fact that like when you watch his ABs, he has some really impressive takes, but he also has times where like, he'll take a strike because that would have taken him out of his approach and he sticks to it. And eventually that pitch is going to come in and he doesn't miss it. So like, his willingness to stick to his approach for a guy that just turned 20, and that commitment to it is pretty impressive. And, anytime that there's a unique player, that I always want to see, like, can they stick to who they are and leverage that? And clearly he's been able to. I'm wondering about kind of the wide range of quality of contact sometimes, where just because of how many moving parts are to the swing, it seems like he can kind of cut himself off a little bit. Like, are more advanced pitchers going to be able to saw him off more? When you look at the discrepancy in exit velocities, like, he destroys fastballs, but maybe not as consistently hitting secondary stuff as hard. Is that because of some of the craziness to his mechanics? That's the part that's very hard for me. But the contact rates are above average. The chase rate and just plate discipline is plus for his age, and he hits the ball incredibly hard. So, like, how can you not get behind that, especially when the defense looks better than I thought it would there? I still ultimately think he'll be a lower batting average, high OBP, and a higher slug guy. And I think what he's going to need to try to figure out a little bit more of is how to tap into that game power more consistently. I think a lot of it right now is hard low line drives. If you look at, like, the hard hit launch angle, it's a lot of hard line drives. If you're going to be a guy that's probably not going to hit for a ton of average, even though the contact rates are decent, like, there's got to be a little bit more of an ability to elevate and tap into that game power. So that's the one thing I'm a little bit wary of at this stage. But he's clearly been very productive and has managed the strikeout rate quite well, and he's going to walk with the best of them.
Yeah, I think it either needs to be like average or better defense at third base, or it needs to be getting to that game power more. One of those two, both would be great, but at least one of those two probably needs to happen for Adams. But I wouldn't say it can't happen. And he's just 20 years old. He doesn't turn 21 until April, and he'll be a AA at that point. So, just a fascinating prospect. Adams with the Brewers there. Okay, we're going to head to a quick message from our sponsors. When we come back, I've got a few guys I want Aram to sell me on, who he's a bit higher on than I am. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds, or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter? If you have, then you're going to love Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code RWPICKS. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. That's code RWPICKS for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. One per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. Okay, if you're like me and you play fantasy football, but don't actually follow football outside of draft season, then you need to use the RotoWire Draft Kit, the rankings, the software, the videos, the podcasts, etc. So definitely make sure you're subscribed to RotoWire. And also, I'll be writing about tonight's Too Early Meatball DC, the first 11 rounds of the first high-stakes league of 2025. So if you want to see those results and my approach, make sure you're subscribed to the site. Okay, back here with Aram Leighton, talking prospects, and just had a few guys that I haven't been able to quite get there on. One of them is, I think, fairly controversial, just because I think I'm the only person who doesn't have Cole Young in my top 100, but Cole Young of the Mariners, obviously middle infielder, very, very impressive approach, very impressive OBP skills. I know he's got 14 homers he's got 8 homers this year, but I don't know. Is this I feel like the ceiling with Cole Young is like Bryson Stott. Is that far off to you? What do you see from Cole Young?
No, it's not far off. And that is the challenge, is like, how much is there to dream on here? I think with Cole Young, what really appeals to me is that it's a very natural hitting, operation. And, does that mean that he's going to light the world on fire? Maybe not. I think you could say a very similar thing about Bryson Stott, but I think this was just the year that he really kind of finally faced that adjustment period more than ever. I do wonder how much power now that there's going to be in there. I was hoping that he'd grow into a little bit more, because we saw him flashing 110s, last year, and I don't think the EVs have really been there totally this year. But I think the defense is incredibly underrated at shortstop. Like, he's always a candidate to move to second. I actually think he can play a pretty solid shortstop. And then beyond that, it's the trajectory that he's on. I just feel like is a guy that, he's going to get to the big leagues somewhat quickly. Is it going to look great? I don't know. I think the stolen base component would be important, especially from a fantasy lens, if you could, find a way to kick that into gear even more. But the approach, the ability to spoil tough pitches. He's one of the better out of zone contact rate guys. And that was probably something that I bought into a little bit too much when he was first coming up. I watched him take some swings on balls that were impossible to get to, like fastballs that were four balls in, like cutting in. And he somehow not only gets to it, keeps it fair, throwing his hands at the ball the other way and shooting it, for a base hit. I'm like, okay, this guy can really hit, and he can. But is that enough? That is the question. Last 30 games have been really, really solid for him. He's hitting 302 with an 861 OPS, but he's walking as much as he strikes out. But through that span, you got like 11 extra base hits, only 1 homer. So I think the ceiling is limited. I do think it's kind of that Stott maybe type. But if he's able to walk more, and I think if there's a little bit more polish to the offensive game as it all progresses, then I think there could be a little bit more there. I still think there's sneaky pull side power that he's trying to balance okay, how do I survive at the AA level and produce, just solid numbers while also trying to get into my power a bit more consistently. And I think that's something that's been a bit of a juggle for him. But I really like what I've seen of late, 13-game hitting streak. And, I think starting to barrel the ball up a little bit more, walking more than he struck out. So I think, right at 21 years old now, which he turned less than a month ago, I think we're starting to see him settle in. But to your point, I do think that the ceiling is, limited. And I think it is going to be doubles over homers type of thing, where it might be 10 to 15 at most. But if he's walking and he's playing both positions up the middle, I still think that's a valuable player and a guy that can be, that 3-win player still.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing for fantasy that I wouldn't factor in on a real life list is like, that's one of the worst parks for him to end up in, just in terms of being like a 12 to 15 homer guy. But I did appreciate your note about the defense there. Cause I mean, him being a shortstop would be pretty huge to me, just because I am somewhat skeptical of him kind of clearing the offensive bar at second base. But if he's giving you average defense at shortstop, I think he could probably hit enough to be an everyday guy there. Now Blake Mitchell, I was low on him before the draft. The Royals were obviously not low on him at all. They took him 8 overall last year. Lefty hitting prep catcher. He's 20 now. He just turned 20 a few weeks ago. 18 homers, 23 steals at single A. Kind of a 3 true outcomes-y kind of approach, though. 16% walk rate, 30% strikeout rate. I'm not banking on the speed being a part of the game in 4 years, and I'm just kind of like, I've got him ranked, but how far away is Blake Mitchell? How sort of special do you think he could be to kind of be sort of in on him when he's seemingly this far away from the majors?
Yeah, this was a guy that was another, I think, one of our biggest climbers. He was a newcomer, and then he jumped quite high. I was not super high on him out of the draft either. And even in the first stint of pro ball, it didn't look great. It looked quite mechanical in the box. And this is a guy that was a two-way prospect, right? He's up to the upper 90s on the mound. He's an athlete. And if you see the way that he, kind of moves behind the dish and operates back there, you can see how athletic he is. And, whether the speed even ends up being a part of his game or not, the fact that he's even able to do that, right, is a testament, again, to the athleticism. So then I'm watching him in the box, and everything's so stiff and mechanical. And, it happens a lot with these types of guys that, they get to pro ball and they just want to make contact, right? They just want to, survive and not get their doors blown off. And, in the early going, he was even at the complex. You remember people were like, oh, geez. And so I think it caused him to get even more mechanical. Whereas now he's a lot more natural and just letting himself be an athlete in the box. And I think the results have really followed. You're seeing more contact for one, but you're also seeing an ability to elevate and an ability to really tap into that power. He's super selective as well for a young power hitter. And that part, I really like. But if you look at the last 50 games, really, since he's kind of made that shift, he's cut the strikeout rate to 27%, and he's got an OPS of 854. What I really like, and also it gets better and better if you go through the last 15, he's been going crazy. The adjustment to be more athletic in the box. Now you're seeing him, on a breaking ball where, it might be taking him down a little bit more than he thought. He's going down and getting it and still crushing home runs. You're seeing more B swings where he's a little bit fooled, but this guy's so powerful. He's a 90th percentile of 106. You wanted to see more swings, right? I always kind of equate it to your bag of golf clubs, right? You can't always have the driver. You're not always going to be right on time, recognize the pitch perfectly and get your best swing off. But some of these powerful hitters, they can, with a 5-iron can still hit it out. Right. So his 5-iron swing now is there. Whereas before it was just he had one swing for one spot and he was swinging over it. Now you're seeing way more athleticism in the box, and especially, really flashing it to the pull side where we've seen him hit balls 450 feet. So just seeing him be that natural hitter with the approach being where it's at, with the ground ball rate being at 33% and the exit velocities being as high as they are. Yeah, it probably still settles in as that 3 true outcome type of approach. But when I saw the strikeout rate, I was expecting the contact rates to be way worse. They're really not. I think it's 82% in zone. So yeah, I mean, that's more than fine when you get the power that he has, and you figure he's continuing to come along, in the overall bat to ball and offensive department. Defensively, he moves really well. There's one issue, and I think it can be rectified, is for whatever reason, his throwing accuracy has been brutal this year. And I wouldn't call it the yips because he's throwing it back to the pitcher, but there's been about 8 throws I've watched that sail into center field that get spiked or whatever. And remember, this guy's a great arm. So that's the only thing that I think needs to be keyed in on and focused on, more than anything this offseason. But I mean, the offensive profile is really shored up. I really believe in that power from the lifting and EV's perspective. And he has all the ingredients to be a really solid defensive catcher too. But there's enough offense there where when that guy's not catching, you want to keep him in the lineup.
So Jefferson Rojas with the Cubs, it's so hard because he's gets full marks for age to level, right? He's 19. He turned 19 in April. He's at high A. Been at high A all year. The production's been kind of okay. 6 homers, 251 average, 315 OBP, 21 steals. Strikeouts are, perfect, 15% strikeout rate. Obviously this isn't a finished product in Jefferson Rojas with the Cubs, but what do you sort of envision the finished product looking like?
That's the fun question with these types of players, because I think there's still room to add strength, and I think he's kind of one of those that could go in a couple of different directions. You have plus hit, I think, very clearly. Potential, of course. I mean, if he's hitting 250, technically it's not plus hit yet, but you could see the plus hit tool potential from the 90% in zone contact rate when you watch the way that he commands his at bats for a kid that just turned 19, and just the feel for the barrel. To me, it's clear that it's very, very good, and I think that's evident. And as you said, the 15% strikeout rate. But does he lean more into that middle infield, contact oriented, stay athletic, stay agile, and just hope that naturally he'll start producing more bat speed and find the gaps and be that type of player? Or is there a scenario where he continues to fill out? Maybe he loses a step, he slides over to third, and he's more of that more a little bit more power oriented, and moving from third to second or whatever it may be. I'm very fascinated to see how this offseason goes and kind of what the plan is for him. But what I do see, and I do feel quite confident in, is that you have that really strong feel to hit. You have, I still think, above average bat speed, especially for his age, where we've seen him flash some decent impact. I think it's just for now another kid that one of the youngest players at his level, really just trying to survive and just put the bat on the ball and spray line drives, where we've seen in stretches, especially in the extended spring training and, or early in low A and things like that, where he'd let it eat. Like he'd get his best swing off a little bit more frequently. And you're like, whoa, okay, he's got some power to dream on there. And I don't know if we've seen that as much this year. So just seeing him be more comfortable and kind of leveraging his advantage counts and letting it eat more, because that would help me believe that there's 15, 20, maybe even a little bit more than that, 20 plus home runs in the tank. But right now it looks like more doubles and just kind of that 15 homers, a lot of doubles type of outlook. But I still think like it's so early for him that he could easily tap into more power and be a 20 to 25 home run guy with a really good feel to hit. But, there's also the concern that it's more 10 to 15, and then he's got to really, really hit. And that's where I'm kind of waiting to figure it out. But the fact that he elevates already as much as he does, I do think as he grows into more pop, he's going to be that 20 to 25 home run guy.
Yeah. And I think with like Cole Young and Jefferson Rojas, those are two guys that would, if you think they're both like, I know it's kind of split among certain people about Young at shortstop, but I think most people think Rojas is a shortstop. So those are guys that would be higher on real life rankings than fantasy rankings, just because the shortstop aspect, it's notable, but it doesn't really move the needle that much. And he is, like, the Cubs have a lot of interesting position player prospects, but he is the best shortstop in the system. Interesting to see where it's going to go with Rojas. I don't really know where it's going to be in like 2 years, but
that's the thing. But I almost love that about it, because the baseline's solid. There's the like terrifying aspect where it's like, oh gosh, it could go really bad or it could go really good. Like Rojas, there's a chance that it just kind of stalls out, but even if it does, like, he's still such a good hitter that there's probably a big role. From fantasy lens, is that going to be exciting? No, he's probably, but I think the fact that we don't know where it's going to go, at least the way I interpret it, is like you have this beautiful template already created in this really nice baseline, and then it's just, where does it blossom from here? Whereas sometimes it's like, with Luke Adams, even to a degree, even though I think there's a nice-ish baseline because he's so patient, I'm like, I have no idea what this thing's going to look like. So that's the nice kind of difference there, I guess.
So there was one guy I wanted to try to maybe sell you on.
I'm here for it.
Moving up a little bit higher, and that's Brady House. But you might be able to come back at me and say I should be lower on him for X, Y, and Z. But
he's looked good.
I'm so tantalized by the bat speed, just the power potential. It's just crazy with Brady House. He opens the year back at Double-A, where he finished 2023. And he's been below my expectations production-wise basically all season. But I kind of want to give him another year as like a top 50 prospect, or at least into a couple months of next season, and just sort of see where it goes, because there just aren't that many guys that I think are locks to stick at third base that can be 30 homer guys. And I think the strikeouts have been up. But I think the bat speed, I think, he's missed a lot. He's missed some time. He just turned 21 during the season. I think the ceiling is still really impressive with Brady House, but where are you at on the hit tool? Like how could I end up sort of regretting having him as high as I do?
It's great that you brought him up too, because he's one of the players that I just feel like I just don't know totally what direction to go. Like I some days I'm like, okay, I can really see it blossoming into the exact player you described, and then other days it's like, man, there's just so many like frustrating rigid edges to his game at times. And then you also have been able to see him take some batting practice, and then you get reminded of what that ceiling can be. And also you need to get reminded. I need to get reminded of his age, like 21 years old. And as you mentioned, like a younger 21, and already, in his second season, playing in Double-A, now in Triple-A. I'm just begging this man to walk. Like, please. 40 games, he's walked 6 times. And that's the thing. Like, it really is the big difference maker for me. You mentioned the bat speed, and I actually think it unlocks a lot for him because he's able to turn around velocity, but also he's able to kind of get away with waiting a bit longer to make decisions because he knows how quick he is, and it actually allows him to hit sliders quite well too. And I love that. Like he hits slide. He's really come along in his ability to hit sliders and spin overall. Like he hits curveball as well. So that part is encouraging, but then he just wants to swing at every fastball, which I don't understand either. Like, why are we chasing 40% of fastballs? So it's this question where it's like, okay, is this something that can be shored up, or is he just a guy that has to be in swing mode and that's the only way that he knows? So I'm super torn on just like what direction I think it can go, but I'm also prepared that like, I could look at him, succeeding at the big league level and be like, man, we didn't even have him in the top 30 by the time he graduated. Like that's a miss. But I also try to think about it as, if I'm a team and, I'm valuing these prospects and I'm making a trade and like, I wouldn't take prospect, 29 over prospect, or I wouldn't take prospect 30 over prospect 29. Like I kind of played that game with myself and I kept kind of feeling how shift a little bit. But I also think that I probably pushed him a little too far, and that was probably just more of me diving into the chase rates and getting pretty concerned about that, not seeing him elevate as much as I'd like to see, getting a little bit concerned about that. But I think when you really add the age component to this thing, he's still going to hit 20 home runs this year. And the defense at third is solid. I would probably say that, you convinced me enough that like also he should probably be a little bit higher, and I was probably a little too harsh on him. But the fastball, just ridiculous chase rates and overall, like it just makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm fascinated to see how AAA goes, where the stuff might not be quite as good, but they're gonna fill up the zone, man. Like if you're not selective, you're never gonna walk. And I think we've seen that in the early going here in AAA, where he swung it well. But he's not walking. So if he's not swinging it well, like it can look ugly pretty quick.
I might be being too stubborn too. Like, I mean, the swing decisions, like you brought up, I mean, it's something he has to get better on for sure. Man, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a comp of like a guy that made like massive strides at like this stage of development with the swing decisions.
And that's the hard part, right? Because it's like he's in the upper levels. Like, do a lot of guys really make this stark shift in the upper levels? Generally, like not as much, but also he hasn't really faced much adversity professionally. Like he's had stretches, but not enough to be like, okay, I need to totally overhaul, the way I approach at bats. Like this guy's had a 140 WRC plus at low A, and then, did a lot of the same in high A where they quickly just started him right away in double in 23. Like, and then even there, like he was putting up really solid numbers. So, if he's hitting 324 in double A, how are you going to tell that guy to swing less? And I know he was only walking 5% of the time and striking out 28%. But if I look up at the scoreboard and I'm hitting 324, someone's telling me to swing less. It'd be hard to especially his first round pick, 20-year-old kid. Like, I don't know if I'm listening to that. So, I think it would require, like, I would love to see how he kind of adjusts to more adversity. And technically speaking, he has been more selective this year. Like he has walked a little bit more. And so this is
a big off season for him, I think, just because like you weren't going to, like, to your point, like what he did last year at high A and double A, those weren't necessarily times where he would look down and be like, oh, I'm doing something wrong. Like, he had an OPS over 900 at high A, OPS over 820 at double A. But I mean, I think this year, this offseason, I mean, he won't be able to look down at his stats and say like, yeah, this was like the best.
I'm ready to go. Yeah. Like I'm ready for the show, and that's ultimately what it is, right? It's like, you're going to get up to the big leagues next year. You got to be ready for it. And, I'm sure that in that preparation through this off season, it's going to be like, okay, what do I need to do to be ready for the big leagues next season? And I think that's going to be the clear cut thing. So I'm with you. Like, this is a guy that if it starts next year where you just see 20 games and he's selective all of a sudden, he'll be the biggest riser for us. So I like, you can't deny the power, like you said, and you can't deny like the production and the defense at third. But I agree. Like, this is kind of that off season where I'm really gonna be able to figure out what direction he can really head.
We had a similar conversation about Everson Pereira last year, and you ended up being right about that one. I mean, I hope he comes back from injury and everything and is fine. But yeah,
and I like
it dangerous chasing that upside with these guys.
Yeah.
So Ethan Salas, really haven't talked about him a ton this year just because he hasn't really been doing anything. And I've got him ranked in like a very similar range as you.
Did you hear the fury of people as well?
I mean, there were times when I would tweet out a picture of my top 25 with the link to my top 400, and I would get replies from non-subscribers being like, the Ethan Salas disrespect, you know? Like,
yes.
It's like, oh, because he's not in my top 25.
Yeah. That's what I was like. I was shocked that we didn't have him in the top 30, and it's like, this is already an invalid list. I'm like, oh man, really? Like, really?
But, you know, I guess the question is like, because I mean, he's so young. It's just, I feel bad, or I feel like sort of, you know, it's a process and everything. Like, but when does Ethan Salas need to start producing for you?
I mean, I didn't even need to see production. I just needed to see something better. Like I just wanted to see like a shift. And up until about 2 weeks ago, like, we hadn't seen that. So hopefully, you know, now he's been better over the last like 12, 15 games. So if that continues, then that's even enough for me, because it's just such an outrageous assignment. And it's so hard for I think people in our position, and I can't even imagine like scouts and you know, front office, you know, people who have to decide, you know, obviously he's not getting traded, but like, you know, try to value a player like that, because you're still going to have your lists of every team, every organization, and, you know, kind of that hierarchy there. And a lot of people's job is to do that, even if those prospects are quote unquote untouchable. I wouldn't know what to do with Salas, because it's like, yes, it's impressive that he's been able to be assigned to aggressive places, but, you know, if you go there and flounder, like, how much do we reward you for that is always the question. The defense is clearly very polished for his age. The bat is clearly very polished for his age. He was good in low A. But, you know, I think it can still be a positive season, considering how ridiculously aggressive this assignment was for a catcher. If this 10-game stretch and then the rest of the season looks like, you know, the 800 OPS that it's been for these 10 games. So even if the cumulative numbers are in the mid 600s OPS wise, I could say, okay, I've seen enough to where I'm very interested for next year. But I mean, this is a guy that's hitting like 140 against anything but fastballs, and just has not looked any more comfortable in early August than he did in early May. And that was my thing, is like, I just wanted to see some sort of progression, and I hadn't. Again, the last handful of games have been good. Hopefully that's a sign of it. But up until the point that we released the list, just hadn't seen a shift really at all. The one thing I do like, he's not getting his doors blown off, right? He's walking at 11% clip, striking out at a 21% clip. But I mean, we just got to see a little bit more, right? Like, there's guys like Sebastian Walcott, who's a little bit older, and I know he's not catching, but he's 18 in high A. He's showing us a little bit more flashes wise. Even what DeVries is doing in low A, you know, what he was doing for stretches, it was like domination there for 30 games. Like, I want to see some more flashes, and I don't think we've gotten any this year.
And the pitching isn't that good at like it's not. Like, and this is something I, you know, like with some of these guys that get assigned like from the draft that go to single A and then they dominate. Like, the pitching's not that good down there. Like, I just don't think the pitching's good enough at high A necessarily to kind of just justify how middling he's been. But I mean, do you think he might be one of those guys that sort of peaked athletically at like 16 or 17?
There's a possibility, right? Like, and you know, just that alone is enough that, you know, it's like, okay, we can't just assume that it's going to continue to just get better and better and better. I still think that there's more there. I think that his separation from his peers definitely peaked. Like, I don't think even as he matures and whatever, he gets to 19, 20 years old, and even if it all starts to really come together, it's not like he's going to be as far apart from his peers as he was when he was 16. Very clearly, I think a lot of that's about the mental side and just like the polish to his game. But I think there's still going to be a better version of Ethan Salas even next year, and I think he's going to get stronger and I think a little bit more adjustable in the box. But my concern is like it's not like he's chasing like crazy or struggling to recognize. He's just really struggling to hit it. So that's the one thing that has been a little concerning. But I don't know if I don't think he's fully peaked. And I think he could still mature and get better. But I do think that we saw such a stark difference because of how much quicker he got closer to what he can be than his peers that, might have caused us to put him, in that tier 1 blue chip prospect area. Whereas, he hasn't really flashed that yet. I don't think there's been a specific thing that we've seen other than, oh, this could be very polished. This is very polished for a 17-year-old. Sure. But what does that look like, as we move forward? I would have liked to have seen, some more flashes and some more things to dream on, because usually it's, oh, look at the tools on this teenage prospect, and he's also got some polish, like we're talking about with Jesus Made. Like,
right.
I don't know if we're seeing like tools and really exciting upside here with Salas as much as some of these other guys.
Do you think the upside is like sort of like Sean Murphy? Is that like kind of?
That's not a bad one, because you've got the defense and that side, and like, again, if he's Sean Murphy, is his career a disappointment? Of course not.
No.
But like, is that like, if you're looking at a guy that can become Sean Murphy, like, is that a consensus top 15 prospect? Like, it's not a conversation if you have him outside of there. Like, I don't know. And that's like I think that's a really positive outcome for a guy like him. And you're still wondering how much power is going to be there too, right? I mean, I think he's hit the ball hard, in stretches, but I'm still wondering like how much juice is gonna be there. That's gonna be a big separator for him, and I don't know how much room there is in the frame to fill out even more. If he can tap into a little bit more power, then that would be, I think that would be a big separator for him. But that's the other thing too, is I'm kind of wondering like, what does it all ultimately even look like with him? I think he's been challenged so ridiculously that we can't even fully figure out and conceptualize what it would look like, as it all comes together.
So I want to finish with a few guys that are sort of really generating buzz at different levels of the minors. Especially like since your list went up, have been generating buzz. Kristian Campbell of the Red Sox, I think, is maybe the buzziest prospect in the minors right now. He's got an OPS over 1,000 on the season. He opened the year at high A as a 21-year-old, and then he's up to AAA now as a 22-year-old. I mean, I definitely see the appeal for fantasy with the power and the speed and just crazy season from a batting average standpoint. Although his BABIP on the season is over 400, so certainly something to factor in there. But like, how real is what Kristian Campbell's doing? Like, I've seen people make the sort of statistical case that he should be considered like a top 20 fantasy prospect, maybe even top 10. Like, it seems like a little over the top to me, but like, how real do you think what Kristian Campbell's doing is?
This is the one, and we talked about it on the call up, like when we were talking about the newcomers to the list. Campbell, his swing kind of goes against a lot of what I understand to be the components that you want to look for in a swing. And I've even talked to some scouts that are like, man, like my initial reports like really beat him up, and like I'm happy to be wrong, but I don't know. I just don't know how those swing components and that path plays at the big league level. And then, and I kind of agreed. And then you just continue to see him do what he's doing. Like you said, he's at 1,000 OPS this year. So like, at what point do you just have to accept that maybe this is just one of those guys that's going to be more unorthodox, and he has so much bat speed and he's just such a natural athlete that he just makes it work. The underlying batted ball data is ridiculous. And I do think that there's going to be things that, big league pitchers can do, he starts kind of closed. It's a little bit longer to the ball sometimes. So like you can probably bust him inside a little bit more. But even then, like every hitter has the blue zones, and he's so quick and is still able to turn stuff around when he's in those advantage counts on the inside part. Like you're going to have to execute to get him out. And there's a lot of hitters like that. So I'm buying what he's doing just from the perspective that you can't really deny the underlying batted ball data. You can't really deny the numbers. And there's just clearly some freakish athleticism here that just allows him to do things in the box that a lot of hitters aren't. Like, see some of the swings he gets off, they just look bizarre. But it's crazy force that he's generating, and it's to all fields. This guy's hit home runs as hard as like 114 miles an hour this year. Like there's just something special about the way that he's able to swing the bat, and it's weird, and you wouldn't teach it, I don't think, to anybody. And I think a lot of other hitters, if they tried it, they would actually get blown up. But sometimes there's those guys that kind of buck the trend, and I think he might be one of those because, again, I think the production will slow down a little bit. Don't get me wrong. But the fact that the contact rates are above average, the fact that the exit velocities are comfortably plus, and the swing decisions are good, it's like, it's very difficult for me to say, hey, well, it's not the exact swing components I like, so it's not going to work. Like sometimes you make exceptions to the rule. And I think Kristian Campbell might end up being that exception to the rule. That said, if he is that, it's not a top 20 prospect for me. It's probably going to be a guy that's, more in the middle to back end. Also, because we're still trying to figure out where he's going to play defensively. Like I'm sure they'd love for him to be a middle infielder rather than an outfielder. They've been playing him a lot at short. I don't think that's going to happen. Is it more of a second base profile? Like I don't know what the defensive home is just yet.
Yeah, like he's got kind of like it's an outfielder's body.
Mm-hmm. I think he's an outfielder, but goodness, do they want another one?
No, yeah, I mean, he's a spare piece almost if he's an outfielder. But I mean, second base, like, is he
with the struggles of Vaughn Grissom to stay healthy and just in general? I think second base makes the most sense. And to be honest, like that power profile at second, like, could be fun. I think that could be a really valuable player.
Could he'd be like an Alfonso Soriano type of second baseman.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like what type of second baseman that he would be. Is it like that Dan Uggla type where he's slugging more than hitting doubles, or is it going to be more of that like doubles and line drives? And I think it is more of that like doubles and line drives. To your point, if you look at the path, it's more flat. Where I think it's going to be, he elevates enough, but it's a path that I think is more conducive to doubles and hard line drives. And I think that's why the BABIP is so high. It's just hit so many line drives.
Yeah, he's got a line drive rate over 30% at all.
Oh my God, yeah, I didn't even know that. I just knew that had to be that just off of the bat path and the BABIP. But yeah, like that's crazy. So to me, it is kind of probably more of that, that watered down Soriano type where it's just lasers on, like low lasers everywhere. And then when he elevates them, like, oh, it'll go. And he might have those stretches where he hits a lot of home runs, but I think it is going to be more of those line drives and stuff. And I'm just trying to figure out how this swing works. And I'm so fascinated, like if it does at the big league level, because like I said, it goes against a lot of what I understand, but his ability to recognize spin really helps a lot too. I mean, he's only chasing sliders at a 15% clip. So it's a unique offensive profile, but when you've got plus EVs like that, it could be a really fun slug in second baseman.
Okay, so a couple others who are just on fire at the plate right now. Two guys from the draft class, Nick Kurtz with the A's. He gets sent to single A, like I was saying, premium college first baseman going to single A. The pitching at single A this time of year is so watered down. He dominates there, 4 homers in 7 games, hits 400. Way more walks and strikeouts in those 7 games. Just got bumped up to double A. I think he went 2 for 4 last night. I was kind of tapping the brakes a little with all the college first basemen from this class, just because it was such a weird year in college baseball with the run scoring environment, and just the recent track record with these college first basemen has been so poor. But Nick Kurtz, has he done anything in these 8 games to like really impress you, or is this sort of kind of what you would expect a guy like him to do against that level of competition?
I thought he's looked honestly pretty impressive. I agree. Like he should feast on that competition, and that's usually where I'll try to just look at like individual at bats, just to kind of see how he's doing. And there was one at bat against, I think it was like Junior Flores, who we talk about the low A like guys. It's not going to be great pitching, but every once in a while you just get this like crazy stuff guy that can come in out of the bullpen. And Flores, sits 99, 100, and they had this incredible battle where he's spotting 99, and then also ripping these nasty sliders, and he's just battling. Kurtz was battling, works a 9-pitch single, and I was just like, okay, man, this guy looks comfortable and dialed in. But then you also see like how hard he's hitting the ball. It's like, because I was kind of curious to see the impact for everybody. All these guys have big time impact, but who was going to have maybe the biggest discrepancy from metal to wood with all the variables that we had in college baseball last year, which I think has made it more impossible than ever to scout amateur wise. And Kurtz has been barreling the baseball. I also think last year playing quite hurt, right? Rib issue, shoulder issue. He just looks healthy. It looks like he's swinging freer. So I think he's looked the most impressive just from the way that he's commanding his at bats, the way he's swinging the bat. Albeit other hitters have had some more challenging, assignments. And of course, Christian Moore's kind of in his own boat there. But of the first baseman and of those like kind of corner guys, I think he's really stood out with the comfort and also, the ability to spoil, but then also the ability to really crush baseballs as well. I think he looks very, very comfortable.
Yeah. I echo all that. And I mean the A's lineup is going to be like mildly like exciting in 10 months or so. Like
I'm excited. Even Max Muncy's swinging it a little bit better. Yeah. Like he's looked pretty good in AAA. Like they've got some fun pieces all of a sudden.
Now you mentioned Christian Moore. I tentatively moved him up to 4th in the class, behind Condon, Bazana, and Weatherholt, just for fantasy, based on what he's doing. And I do want to like tip my hat to the Angels. I know they're so easy to make fun of, but it's not as easy as they're making it look to just take the guy that they think can move quickly and to like hit on those guys. Like, so I don't know. What do you do with what Christian Moore's doing? Because he goes to single A for 2 games, 307 WRC plus in those 2 games. Now he's hitting 385, 5 homers in 13 games at Double A. Strikeouts are up, as you probably expect them to be, just kind of given where he was at Tennessee. But, is Christian Moore like going to be is the Neto Moore double play duo going to be one of the better young tandems in the league here in about a year?
I think it could be a really fun one. I think Neto is also one of the more underrated players in baseball now all of a sudden. So I'm glad you mentioned him. It's another guy that we would forget did not get to develop at all. So he's been developing at the big league level and still been, an above replacement level player. Now he's blossoming. So I think the idea of him and Moore up the middle could be really fun. But, there's going to be some growing pains, I think, for Moore with how quickly he's going to get up there. And, I think just some of the components to his game where he's got crazy power, clearly. He's got a knack for the big moment. He taps into his power in games. It's all feel. It's really fun. I think there's going to be some swing and miss, a little bit more than maybe, we've seen here. And I think people are going to get very excited, which they should. And, we elevate him and we should. But I think we also still have to kind of look at what the pre-draft template was and say, okay, he's just going to be an elevated version of that, meaning the hit tool I still think is going to be fringy, and I think it's going to be there's going to be a decent amount of swing and miss on elevated fastballs, stuff like that. But then it's dependent on the approach, and the approach has been good. But I still think he's going to be that power oriented, work some walks, second baseman that can hit you 30 in a good year. But I the only pause and like caution I would put in is like I don't think he's changed my perspective on like the ability to hit for average. I think what he has solidified for me is I had some concerns. I'm like, about the hit tool to the degree of, I'm like, is he going to be able to get into his game power enough? Because I was worried that he might swing and miss. And he made the biggest leap in contact rates from the year before to his draft year. I think it was 65%, then went up to 77%, which is great. But I was like, okay, in this offensive oriented environment, like all these things, like how much of it was him? How much of it was the environment? Of course, contact rates, that's going to be more you. But still, I was like a little bit wary. Clearly, he's made a huge improvement. And he's just a good hitter relative to where he was before, and a good power hitter. But I still think he's going to be a higher whiff guy. I just think my adjustment from my pre-draft report is that he's going to have a lot more of an easy time getting into his game power, and I think the swing decisions are going to be pretty good. So he's going to be able to be that elevated version of maybe what we thought he could be. But I don't think he's a different. It's not like the Tamar Johnson thing, right? Where it was like, oh, he's 70 hit, and we'll see how the power comes along, and now it's like total opposite. It's like power over hit. I don't think that the hit tool outlook on Christian Moore is any different overall.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think it's impressive how much power he's getting to at AA. But yeah, I do think hit over or power over hit for sure with Christian Moore. And I mean, it's kind of more a testament to, like, I didn't think it was that great of a draft class. So just a guy going to AA and doing that is something that nobody else is doing. So
absolutely no. I mean, it wasn't a great, and that's why I think the Kurtz pick was really impressive as well. Because I think it sounds crazy, but there's a chance because there's so many flaws with different players in this class that, like, if you look back and say, oh man, they grabbed Kurtz at 4 or 5, like they didn't. That was one of the best power hitters in the class. Like, there's a chance he could be more productive than just about anybody. Like, I think you could find flaws with just about every single hitter in the class outside of. Yep. I think Bazana's pretty sound and Weatherholt's pretty sound, but again, those guys don't have the ceiling as the other guys. But like, I don't know, I've got quite some concerns about Condon's swing, and we'll see how that goes. But like, and those are the best players. Like, those are the clear guys. So in a draft where you're getting the second tier of those flawed guys, I think Moore actually was an exciting snag for them.
All right, this has been awesome. Really appreciate it. And great work on your top 100.
Thank you.
You want to let people know where they can find that and all your great content?
So we have our prospect podcast, The Call Up, where we're talking prospects just like this and breaking it down and keeping up to date with promotions, performers, all that good stuff, and interviewing players. I think tomorrow's episode we'll have conversations with Bubba Chandler. So very excited for you to check that out, and Thomas Harrington. But every couple of weeks we'll have player interviews and always keeping you up to date. And then, of course, the Just Baseball show is our flagship podcast. And then check out justbaseball.com for all the rankings and reports, and also just articles on Major League Baseball every single day. But thank you so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Fantastic stuff, as always. Always love talking baseball with you. And we'll do it again sometime. The podcast is brought to you by Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPicks for $50 in Pick 6 credits with a $5 deposit.